Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who never judge a book by its cover, but do sometimes judge a book by holding it to their forehead and closing their eyes. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a different genre, idea, or author sometimes. And right now for Occult Detective October, we are reading every short story in Algernon Blackwood's The Complete John Silence. I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested in getting back to this thing that I keep talking about, which is how much of the occult Algernon Blackwood comes from occult doctrine, Golden Dawn type people, and how much is just the whimsy of his dark imagination.
Oh, I'm Bob, and I'm already feeling guilty for my sign off in the last episode. I just got so into the Halloween spirit. I'm sorry. Just like poor Vizan. I am really interested in also the development of John Silence in this story, because this feels like the most Sherlock Holmes of the three stories so far. It feels very similar, and it feels like Blackwood is deliberately trying to use some Sherlock Holmes tropes and trying to experiment with in how he's creating this detective.
I think that's a really apt observation, that it feels the most Sherlock Holmes, or even we could even just say like the most distinctive detective-like. But it makes me realize that we've really seen three John Silences in three stories. Three different types of our hero. I think it really goes to show that Blackwood didn't, I guess I should say this egg didn't come out of the oven fully cooked. You know what I mean? It still had a little bit of cooking to do. Algernon Blackwood is still figuring out who his character is as he goes.
Well, he feels consistent to me as a character, but we're learning more about him. What I think changes a lot is earlier in the last episode, you said, is it a frame or is he a hero? I think every position with him is not a lens, but the position of the main character is different in every story. And this time, he's the most involved. It's the most adventurous. We actually see John Silence running. We see John Silence climbing through sand. There is a direct, I think this is intentional anyway, I think it's Hound of the Baskervilles. Sherlock is described often like a dog. They're hunting down, they're trying to find the dog, but he's described like as a dog. And John Silence is described as a dog many times in this story. Even at one point, he points, which Sherlock Holmes also points, and is compared to a pointer, like a dog, pointing at which way to go. So I think in this case, we get the adventure of Dr. John Silence, and it feels like Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with everything you said, but the deductive method is not the same. I mean, that goes without saying, but it's worth talking about his method because we see it here on display more so than ever before. He is clairvoyant, and the specific method that he uses is called psychometry. The idea is basically you take an object and you meditate on it, and you get intuitive understandings of something about its origin, something about its character, something about the character of a person who previously owned it. And he gives a demonstration of how this works, not by doing it himself, but actually by demonstrating it through his buddy, his partner, his other person, his Watson. I wanted to know what you made of this. The fact that John Silence doesn't seem to have a monopoly on psychic powers, but it seems to be available to anyone.
Well, I know when we read Sherlock Holmes, often the attitude towards Watson is that he's an idiot, but he's not. He's extremely smart, and Holmes really trusts him. That's why he brings him along. He knows that Watson will see things that maybe at least Watson will be very helpful. And I think this other character, he doesn't do... It's unclear how helpful he is, but he obviously has special powers. He can, when Dr. John Silence gives him the letter, he's like, oh my God, I suddenly feel a lot of heat. I can feel some sort of heat emanating like into my spirit, and it feels very uncomfortable. And John Silence says, oh, good thing I brought you along. He also has dealt with mummies. Like that's just we'll get to the mummy in a second, but this other character who is very much a Watson says, oh yes, I've cut through many mummies before in my past. What? But, which was great. But you mentioned deductions earlier, and he deals with deductions directly in this. And he says that he has an impression. says, merely my impression. If you pay attention to impressions and do not allow them to be confused by deductions of the intellect, you will often find them surprisingly, uncannily accurate.
Yeah. And I guess that was my word, using intuition. But do you agree that that's like a good summary of what's going on here? Using the intuition without trying to rationalize it or bring in the intellect in any way to take it further than that.
I just had the most terrifying deja vu ever, Zach. I feel like we've just talked about this exact thing before, but I don't think we did. It just, whoa, okay. Whoa, don't drink coffee and go to the gym, folks.
Bob, you need to pay attention to that intuition. What if we haven't talked about it before, but you're merely intuiting that we will talk about it again?
Oh, God.
In the next John Silence story.
You're freaking me out. This is not an act.
We just unlocked your clairvoyant powers. Wow.
Very odd.
You saw it here first, folks.
We saw. Here's the evidence of clairvoyance. He has a clairvoyant moment too when he just suddenly says, "Egypt, Egypt." He has this sudden realization that it's a mummy, and this fire elemental that the mummy is using, because the mummy is, they have wronged the mummy. But he tells the colonel, who is the kind of guy who is having these psychic problems at his house. He has a large estate, and his sister has been confined because she's going through all her husband is basically burned alive, and then she's just kind of lost it a little bit and is trying to deal with it living at this estate. But all of these weird fires are cropping up, and when Dr. John Silence is talking to the colonel, he suddenly has a Jimmy Neutron brain blast. What am I trying to say, Zach? He has a clairvoyant vision.
Sure.
Okay. That's better than a brain blast, I suppose. So he has this clairvoyant vision, and he explains this to us. So he guesses exactly what the colonel is going to say as the colonel is saying it. And then he says, the colonel's like, "Oh my God, how did you know what I was thinking?" And he says, "No, it's not that impressive. It's only that you are thinking very vividly, and your thoughts form pictures in my mind before you utter them. It's merely a little elementary thought reading." So he demonstrates to us and to this other character who has not experienced the magic of Dr. John Silence before. He demonstrates exactly how he does these things, and he explains it to us. And that's this is the story, I think, where he most directly explains his methods.
By sheer coincidence, or maybe I intuited that we were going to be talking about this very topic. But today I was doing some occult research, and I came across this book called Thought Forms: A Record of Clairvoyant Investigation by Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater. And it's a really interesting book. It's in the public domain now, but you can get some really nice republished version of it from Sacred Bones Books. But the idea is, these two people visualized thought forms and basically rendered them artistically on the page. So while thinking certain thoughts and thinking certain emotions, they visualized what the form of the thought itself was. What is the thought's aura? And then it's like this book that is talking about the method and talking about what these forms are and what they look like of thought itself. I ended up buying a copy, but I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But I think that these are ideas that are floating around. I mean, this book was written in 1905. And the story we're reading now is what, 1933, 34?
1908.
1908. Oh, okay.
Is it older than that? Yeah, it's pretty old.
We're truly drinking the same water here.
He gives so we have the power of thought, being able to intuit or being able to clairvoyantly guess. He says, "I know exactly what you're thinking." In this, he also recommends to Mr. Hubbard, who is his Watson, while they are getting closer and closer to this dangerous thing, this fire elemental, he says, these thoughts could be dangerous. We're going to see the colonel get obsessed, and we're going to see him almost be possessed, and we kind of have to stop it from happening to us. There are such intense experiences that Mr. Hubbard says he has. He says, I feel like I was flying through the stars. I had so much joy. It was uncontrolled. Like, basically, if you told me to do anything, I would do it because it was the most pleasure I've ever experienced. He has like the most pleasure, then the most fright. It's these crazy high levels, like intense experiences. But then before this all happens, he knows he can protect himself because Dr. John Silence explains, okay, use this, like, he compares it to being inside of an envelope. Use this envelope. He says, picture yourself in a protective envelope and build it up with the most intense imagination you can evoke. Pour the whole force of your thought and will into it. Believe vividly all through this adventure that such a shell, constructed of your thought, will, and imagination surrounds you completely, and that nothing can pierce it to attack.
So what do you make of all this thought stuff? Because it seems to be coming up again and again in almost every Algernon Blackwood story that we have read. But I noticed that thinking and the kind of like manifestation of thoughts, the materiality of thoughts themselves, doesn't seem to be present in more modern weird stories, later written weird stories, or even, I guess you could say, maybe even the culture today. I don't know. Like, is it just a relic of a certain time and place? What do you make of all this, Bob?
I'd be very curious to find out, especially when he's involved in Theosophy and Golden Dawn. What do thoughts have? What power do they hold in these organizations? My thoughts are always stupid. There's like, but this is really interesting where these thoughts linger and they have so much power. There is one point when they're doing the blood sacrifice, as you do on the weekend, and they're looking at the bucket of blood, and then it starts boiling up because a figure appears there. But they say, for undoubtedly there was a disquieting thought, holding terror as well as awe in the picture his words conjured up, the conception of a human will reaching its deathless hand, spiteful and destructive, down through the ages to strike the living and afflict the innocent. I think it is very interesting that thoughts can reach all the way back, because we're talking about a mummy from many, many, many. This priest that was mummified and wants revenge. This priest, through a magic to protect its own tomb, has kind of forced a fire elemental to plague these people because it wants its jewelry back. Now, this thought is thousands of years old, and it's this magic that is attached to the tomb. It has traveled across the pond, and it has traveled across millennia. I think John Silence and thoughts are very, in the first story it says thoughts are dynamic. They link, they continue even after you have them. But I think Algernon Blackwood takes thoughts very seriously. In The Willows, if you think too much about this nth dimension, this thing that's going to come and kill you, it will come and kill you faster. So the thoughts have either the power to lure something that will kill you, but it also has the power to protect you in this protective envelope.
I want to talk fire elementals. So I don't know anything about elementals. I don't know anything at all, but I did a little bit of research, and I'll tell you what I found. So Paracelsus, the famed 16th century alchemist, he basically said that there's 4 fundamental elementals. Now, we all know what the 4 elements are, right? So like fire, air, water, earth, So he said that there's essentially, beyond just the material element, there's also a spirit to each element. So for fire, that would be salamanders, not the lizard, salamanders. Air, that would be sylphs. Never heard of this word in my life, but sylphs. For earth, that would be gnomes. And then for water, that would be undines. I'm presuming that the being that we're working with in here is in some sense a Paracelsian salamander. I did wonder why Algernon Blackwood didn't use these kind of 16th century terms for these elementals and just called them elementals. Maybe because even by the early 1900s, things like gnomes and salamanders were already being used in wildly other contexts.
They're too cute.
Imagine how the story would have read completely different if he just said it. And there was a salamander causing fires everywhere.
That's just adorable. We're back into the town of cat country.
It's basically Charizard at that point.
It's basically Charizard, yes. Charmander. But yeah, I think it is interesting that he doesn't do that. It would kind of take away the fear of it. This elemental, I think, is so great, and it's the best part of the story. The mummy was awesome, but just nuts. What? But I think the elemental is so cool and so scary because it's this beautiful country house in the middle of like just very rural England. And while they're in this kind of manor house, they'll just look out and see like a little fire start. And it's always in a circle. It's like the fairy rings, mushrooms that just appear overnight and they're there in the morning. But it's a fire that shows up and they appear in different circles, all of these places. And it's this fire elemental traveling kind of, I mean, when you hear about it traveling, it kind of sounds like a salamander running really fast through the woods. But it's really fun and scary. I think this is actually kind of a more scary story than the last two. These fires just start, and they even start happening in their house. It becomes very dangerous. There's smoke everywhere. They almost die in this one a few different times. And I think the fire elemental really brings some horror into the story.
My favorite part about the setting was the random ancient druid stones that were scattered around.
He's like, this is not important. These are
yeah, don't worry about it. Just some ancient druid stones. It kind of harkened back to me to that Lovecraft story, the Dunwich Horror, where it opens up by being like, oh yeah, by the way, there's some giant megaliths hanging out just outside this town, setting the stage for, something crazy is going on. But it's a total red herring. It's not the important thing. It's actually the mummy that was stolen from Egypt and buried in their backyard.
Which was insane. How did he figure out that it's Egypt? I mean, obviously he's got some sort of clairvoyance when he reads the letter. I'm wondering if that's part of it. And when the fire elemental is still, they've essentially banished it at this point. They've done that whole blood sacrifice. They've let it jump into the kernel, and it speaks through them, and it says, I was controlled. I've seen Osiris. I've seen Thoth. And then it goes away. However, it appears again as flames, but it appears as all of these different symbols. It doesn't appear as creatures. It's like circles and triangles. I thought that was very interesting and feels very occult, that fire is communicating almost in different symbols.
Yeah. That was cool. I agree. That was cool. If anyone wants to make a film version of this, I would want to see that specific scene. The blood sacrifice, though, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I almost forgot. There was another bit of interesting connection to, I guess you could say, occult history happening there, which was, he says, the process need cause you no distress. We sit round the bowl and await results, nothing more. The emanations of blood, which, as Levy says, is the first incarnation of the universal fluid, furnish the materials out of which the creatures of discarnate life, spirits if you prefer, can fashion themselves a temporary appearance. So he's saying that within the blood, there is a kind of substance, which he calls the first incarnation of the universal fluid, and then the spirits can come and they can inhabit that substance. He cites Levy. Now, I knew this name, Eliphas Levi. This is actually a famous occultist from France. He's one of the first people to take tarot cards, which are, at that time just being used as a kind of parlor game, and say, no, these are occult instruments. You can tell the future. Cartomancy through tarot cards. And he created his own tarot decks at the time. It was a craze, everyone was trying to get read by him, trying to buy his tarot cards, things like that. So this is actually a famous occultist who he is citing here and inserting it into his stories. I don't know. It's nice drawing connections,
I wanted to see what you thought too. So the elemental energy, using blood as the first, fluid that these spirits can kind of inhabit, so you can see them. He also talks about, the elementals are not necessarily good or evil. He says that it's the same idea for all magic. It is the motive that constitutes the magic is black or white magic. And they can be the vehicles of curses or blessings. A curse is nothing more than the thought of a violent will perpetuated. I thought this was very interesting in the first story, he becomes like a filter for evil. And so the evil goes through him, and then it itself is kind of released and can kind of go on. It no longer has to exist as this violent will perpetuated. I thought this was an interesting idea of the motivation or the intention behind a kind of magic. This, I think, was very interesting too. We get a real insight. I mean, we've seen through actions, I guess, how kind of strong, especially with his spirit, how strong John Silence is. In the first book, it tells us that he is really defined by having he's just got a good personality. He never, sounds like writing a dating profile for him. He is very honest, and he wants to do the right thing so he can be that filter. But in here, it's interesting where we have the Watson character, because Watson always adores Sherlock in his narrations. Like, oh my God, he did this. Oh my God, he's incredible. And now Mr. Hubbard is doing the same thing. And there are so many times where Mr. Hubbard says, I was going to lose it. I was going to absolutely lose my mind, either because I was so entranced by, I guess, the temptations that this magic could do. So all of the pleasure it was giving me, I was just going to go wherever. And then I heard John Silence's voice reminding me to stay grounded. Or when he gets scared, he's like, I was just going to give up. I was going to run the hell out of there. And then John Silence gave me courage. And he seems, that's again why I think it's very Holmesian, but we have many descriptions of how cool as a cucumber he is. And he even tells us, I've never seen him frightened, but I've seen him anxious many times. And I thought that was great. He's never frightened. He always is calm. Sometimes he gloats a little bit. He's like, oh, I figured it out just like Holmes. You know, I've solved the puzzle. Don't you want to know how I solved the puzzle? But he's a very anxious person.
I mean, when dealing with immortal spiritual forces, wouldn't he could warrant a little anxiety, I think. You know, I can't blame him.
And I think he's anxious. He cares about the other people involved so much. I think he's worried. He's anxious that he's going to let Mr. Hubbard and Colonel Rag die. Sorry, Greg.
Right. Bob, I want to ask you about genre. What do you think this is? Is this weird fiction? You know, like would John Silence belong in the same anthology in which we read The Willows, or is this something else? You know, one thought would be something akin to like Victorian ghost tales or something like that. Or do you look at this and see a completely different tradition?
Oh, it feels very much like why we've chosen it for this. It feels like occult detective fiction. This is...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that one. Been there the whole time.
Yeah.
I think that because, especially this story is, we keep saying this, but it is very Sherlock Holmes. It's very Holmesian. And there's something different about the weird, because it feels like the weird has to leave you hanging in a certain way, even if something is tied up or someone, the evil is vanquished or the evil is processed or something. The answer is always left unsaid. And I feel like John Silence is a comforting figure here to not just say like the Swede and the other unnamed narrator in The Willows to say, oh, thank God we made it out of there. And we think we know what was there, but we're not really sure. Here, John Silence is an anchor point for us to know things are going to be okay.
Yeah, not only that, but I think a weird story would be attempting to create anxiety and ambiguity and unresolved questions in the reader, which Blackwood does very, very well in his book, The Willows, for example. But in these stories, thinking of this one and the previous one we just read with the Town of Cats, he seems to be tripping over himself to give you all of the answers. It's not just here's what the monster is, but it's also, here's how you stop the monster, and also here's the theory behind how the monster is stopped. Here's the magical theory. You know what I mean? Like, he's giving you really everything with no room to sit there wondering, other than just to say, oh, wow, that's cool. I wonder if something like that exists in real life, or, that kind of wonder.
But at the same time, it does feel very weird in a way, because Algernon Blackwood is very interested in what, like, what's his name? He was like the #1 druid. Oh, John Michael Greer, who writes a lot about Golden Dawn, writes a lot about druidism. they seem similar. John Silence, or at least maybe Algernon Blackwood and John Michael Greer seem similar. They are interested in this idea of raising one's consciousness or having an experience. And for John Michael Greer, it's saying, okay, we come together, we meet in this kind of dusty room, we have all these kind of knickknacks, but then we try and make some sort of experience together as a group where we come to a more intense experience of the world, something where we realize how things work. And I think that's what that's what Algernon Blackwood wanted to do with weird fiction. And whereas The Willows feels weird, I think John Silence is still weird. It's just not written like a weird. It's still an idea of using theosophy or using the Golden Dawn or using any of these occult practices or any interest in the occult to have an experience you wouldn't otherwise normally have, and an experience that should raise your consciousness above where it was previously. But I think one thing that's very weird in this story is that mummy. Like, why is the mummy there? And when the sister, the three guys, they have to crawl, they dig down to try and find this weird museum, where the mummy is buried. It's not really a museum, but it's just kind of this weird bunker. They slip down through the ground because they reach the tunnel, and then they have to crawl through it for 10 yards. And they say it's so tight that it takes them about 10 minutes to just go 10 yards, and they have to hold each other's ankles. They get in there, the mummy comes to life. But the weirdest part is when the sister, who's like, I don't know, she's 70 or 65, so she's old, she stumbles down after them and then just raises up, and she like crawls. It's like the Grudge. She crawls kind of towards them like this horrible creature, and then has to give back the emerald to the mummy, and then she just dies.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very weird.
Yeah, that was a great ending. And I might even say that that was my favorite ending to one of these stories so far. Endings have all been pretty good and memorable, I have to say, but this one was the only one where I was on like the edge of my seat, like, I make those noises while I read, actually.
Let's do that walking down the street.
Yeah.
I loved when Flame got his eyesight back. I was worried about Flame, the collie. That was nice.
That was nice, yeah.
But the creepy lady crawling through a hole and dying, that was pretty intense.
I like our little like mutual moment right there of being like, I'm glad everything worked out for the dog.
Yeah, but then all of these other harrowing things that are happening in these silent stories. Yeah.
All right, well, we got what, 2, 3 of these left? I think we got 2.5 of these left, I think is the official count. I think the third.
Is one of them unfinished?
It's very, very short, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out when we get there. Anyways, I'll talk to you later, Bob.
I'll talk to you later. I want to see more of this good magic, and I'll see you on the magic bus.